Hey, hi everyone. For those of you who don't yet know, I'm Misha Glenny. I'm the rector of the IWM, co-organizer of the Vienna Humanities Festival. And here we are. You are the lucky ones because you're coming to one of the great sessions, even though you don't yet know it. Let me explain why. Because ECE TEMELKURAN has some real tales to tell. ECE is extremely well known as a writer and political commentator, particularly in her own country, Turkey. But she's also written for The Guardian, she's written for the New York Times, FAZ in Germany, Spiegel, and so on and so forth, you name it. She's even written for Der Standard, the media partner here at the Vienna Humanities Festival. She was recognized as the most read political commentator in Turkey on more than one occasion. And get this, there's nobody who follows me on Twitter who has anything approaching the number of followers that ECE has, because she has, get this, almost 3 million followers, right? So
not everybody loves me there, by the way.
what you're looking at here is a sort of gigawatt influencer.
I wish.
And you're about to find out. You're about to find out why, as I said. So we know, or at least I know ECE. She's a novelist as well, but I know ECE from 2 books of hers that I've read: How to Lose a Country, The 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship, and following that, slightly more upbeat title, Together, 10 Choices for a Better Now.
We changed the subtitle, excuse me.
Have we? What have we changed it to?
A Manifesto Against the Heartless World, which I like better because it sounds less self-helpish.
Right. My edition was called 10 Choices for a Better Now, but I think you were wise to change the subtitle. That's very good. Now, the point about her first book is, and that's what we're going to start on, is that ECE was one of the first people to identify and codify what was happening with the emergence of populist leaders before the rest of the world had taken much notice about it. And what we saw with her book is that the lessons that she had drawn primarily from her own country, Turkey, were then replicated elsewhere. Now, most of us started to identify these kind of problems, ECE, in 2016. I think first, certainly for us Brits, with the Brexit referendum, but then, you know, but outside of the United Kingdom and Europe, not many people in the rest of the world understood what an earthquake Brexit was in terms of political culture and mechanisms and institutions in the United Kingdom. But everybody did understand what an earthquake the election of Donald Trump could possibly represent. And of course, their worst fears were realized. Now, in 2016, there was another event, and that was the attempted coup against Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey to this day. Can you take us through, from a personal perspective and a political perspective, when it was that you started to get concerned about how Erdogan's presidency, which stretches back till God knows when now, I've actually forgotten, when you started to think, uh-oh, there's something really serious and different going on here?
First of all, about being a celebrity, sort of. I was in Barcelona, and we were walking on the Lorraine with Brian Eno, Neither of us has sense of orientation, so we were with GPS trying to find the hotel, and I told him, you know what, I'm an unknown celebrity. And he said, I've been there for 30 years. The first thing you have to do, you have to live long. Then people respect you. So yeah, that was a good wisdom. 2016, that's when I left the country as well, right after the coup attempt. That was an earthquake, like literally, because there were, you know, fighter jets flying over us, and when they're faster than the sound, this crackling voice takes over the sky, and you feel like air is a solid object and it is breaking. It's hard to describe. But it was the grand finale of a process, as you said. The first time I noticed was actually 2002, when they first came to power. I was a journalist then, and I was going around the country doing reportage. And I was talking to these people who were arguing that they are beyond and above politics. That's always a curious, you know, claim. And also they were constantly emphasizing that they were clean, unlike the politicians, all these candidates of the party. That was the first, like, little alarm bell, let's say. But then 2007, when Erdogan came to power for the second time, he was in a balcony, not unlike Mussolini or Hitler, and he gave a speech which had a very interesting detail. He said, those who didn't vote for us are also the colors of this country. And everybody then who was in love with him, and I'm not talking about domestic politics, I'm talking about global politics as well, because Obama was quite, you know, praiseful towards Erdogan, and he was then the exemplary leader for the Middle East, so on and so forth. So it was international community, domestic politics, everybody was hopeful in the second term. Whereas after that speech, I thought, oh, now we are second-class citizens, those who didn't vote for him.
Sorry, just parse that for us a little. What was he meaning when he said those who didn't vote for us are? The
colors are other colors in this country, as if, like, you know, we are the garniture, embellishment around the plate, not the main course.
Right.
So many people thought that this was an embracing remark, whereas I thought, oh, we are not the first-class citizens anymore, those who didn't support him. And then on, the country gradually became a party state anyway, which is today fully formed, I guess. 2012, I lost my job because I wrote, you know, 2 articles which was quite harsh on him. And then...
Who were you working for at the time?
Habertürk. I worked for Milliyet for 10 years, but then during that time I was working for Habertürk. So I lost the job, and you know, at the time, if you're losing your job because of political reasons, it was like a stigma. Nobody would hire you. Then I quit journalism.
So hold it a sec. When you lost the job at Habertürk, did the editor just come to you and say, sorry, Ece, but it's game over. We've heard from the top that you can't write for us anymore?
Not even that. You don't even need that. I was in Tunis writing my novel, by the way, at the time. I got this phone call, and he said, Ece, you know. Yes, I know. Thank you. Thank you. Like, I don't know how many, 10 seconds? And then your whole career is gone. Nobody has to make an explanation. Nobody knows what's going on. So, yeah. That was a lovely phone conversation.
So this is 2012. What's the is the European Union still in love with Erdogan at this point?
Oh, absolutely. And I am in LSE, let's say, or SOAS, or Americans as well, by the way, or Harvard, or you know, whatever you can think of, Oxford. I'm giving speeches, and I'm telling something is wrong in the country. You have to look deeper. And then I was this crazy woman, well, young woman then, who doesn't like the idea of democracy. That was the dominant narrative.
So you were essentially accused of being
Oh,
anti-democratic.
of course, loudly so. Yeah, and by Western academics as well, academics and journalists as well.
Wow.
And imagine, this is 2010. For 6 years, they didn't know what really was happening in Turkey. There was a pause of, there was a moment in 2013 when Gezi uprising happened. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
It was the best days of our lives. Then, people were like, oh, wait, this is not what we thought. CNN, BBC, and so on. Otherwise, until then, it was all over the place, Erdogan. And, okay, I remember this day in Oxford, for instance. One of his spin doctors was in Oxford, giving a speech at the Middle East Studies Center. And he was telling this tale about Turkey. And everybody was so eager to believe him, believe in Erdogan's regime. And we were the ones who, critics of the regime, critics of Erdogan then, were stigmatized as, anti-democrats, who is not, very much in favor of what people's choices and so on.
And when he was doing those things which looked like, from the outside, to us, obviously naive people at the time, that he was actually trying to implement some of the EU's demands over the question of the use of the Kurdish language, for example. Mm-hmm. Was that all just a bluff?
Well, now you and all the Western audiences know about the typology of the, of the persona. I'm not talking about Erdogan. Now everybody knows Boris Johnson, Trump, Bolsonaro, Orban, and so on. So there is a shared feature of these characters, which is they don't actually have a particular ideology. They just want to be in power, so they can shift their political choices overnight. It doesn't really matter. Actually, that is the zenith of cynicism.
A defining characteristic. Almost.
Exactly. So
yeah.
they are doing, they're making these incredible alliances, contradicting alliances, lots of inconsistencies there. But it's not their problem, because what they're trying to do is just to keep themselves in power. And, the preferred alliance of the day is good enough for them. Is this working?
It is. It is.
Okay.
It's slightly cuts out now and then when you turn towards
certain
me.
words.
So let's have a look. So you started to codify later on what had happened. Before we get to that codification, I want you to talk through the process in your mind about, as you already said, in 2016 you decided to leave. But prior to 2016, there was the first assault on what we understood to be the deep state in Turkey, i.e. the military. How did you interpret that? Were you surprised about the efficiency that Erdogan was able to dismantle domestic military power in Turkey?
Yeah. Well, this is not the first coup I saw in Turkey. The first time I was 8 years old.
In 81?
1980.
80, yeah.
1980, I was 8. And I still remember the scenes from that period. And I grew up in a leftist family. So I grew up in the defeated side. So, I know all the stories that were kind of hidden from the ordinary people or the right-wing people and so on. 1980 is one of the cruelest, meanest military coups in the modern history. It was somewhere between, with Chile. I think they were horrifying. So I know that when military decides to make a coup, you know, some people in pajamas, like they did in 2016, cannot stop those things. It doesn't work like that. They shoot you down, end of story. Whereas in this one, civilians were killing the soldiers. Strange, and I leave it there. But one of the, you know, fun facts about Turkish, you know, people is that army, historically, is the most trusted organization, institution in the country. So I was actually surprised, not in a bad way, but I was surprised that people came out to stop the army from military coup. And, you know, the soldiers were trying to convince people to go back to their places, which doesn't happen in a normal coup in Turkey. Ironically, I was 8 when the first coup happened, and my nephews, half American, half Turkish, they were at the time in Istanbul, and they, you know, so this coup attempt, so it is transmitting some sort of generational conversation in a way over Turkish history. It was interesting.
So basically what you're saying is that the coup was stage managed.
I cannot say that. What I can say that it was an interesting coup. Like as interesting as a coup can get. But also, does it really matter? That's my question. Because at the end of the day, Erdogan, being the genius political animal he is, he, you know, benefited from this crisis in the best possible way a politician can. He has been like that. First of all, he's a lucky man. I mean, like, we have to give it to him. But also, he knows how to turn crises into, you know, advantages. And this was a big one. So it became the biggest advantage for him.
Now, what was the process in your own mind about what to do? As you know, the decision to leave your own country is a very difficult, distressing decision to make. So when did that first enter your mind, and did you have warning signs that you needed to do it sooner rather than later?
First of all, I have to tell you something. If it wasn't you, I wouldn't tell these personal stories. No, seriously. Because the Western audiences love this, you know, intellectual damsel in distress running away from barbarians, you know, throwing herself into the arms of Western civilization thing, which I hate. Because it's not like that, and I'm not telling my story, I'm actually telling their story to them. But still, since it's you, I'm telling this. It was a very emotional decision. And I don't even know if I decided this. I had an apartment in Zagreb because, you know, my publisher there has become a good friend, already had become a good friend. And she's younger but wiser than me. In 2014, she said, you know what, your country is going towards shit. You need a place in Europe. You don't have money. And Zagreb is the only place you can have a apartment. So she literally forced me to get on the plane, come to Zagreb, buy an apartment in 24 hours, and she fixed it. And I forgot about that apartment even. So I went to Zagreb in 2016, October, a few months after the coup attempt, and I had one pair of pants, 2 T-shirts, nothing. Because I couldn't bring myself to admit to myself that I am leaving the country. We are like Iranians in that sense. Maybe it's because we are not truly colonized country. We have this very deeply embedded sense of duty towards our people, and you know, this, I wouldn't say patriotic, but in a revolutionary sense, you know, we are so connected and we feel the sense of, you know, we owe them we owe our people, especially if you're educated, you owe them even more. So it is not easy to bring, it wasn't easy to bring myself to go from the country. But now I'm looking at, from a historical perspective, I was, and people like me, were already abundant. Because we are the product of a political project, Turkish Republic, a secular republic. And, okay, I might be a lefty, whatever, but I'm still the product of that project. And that project was dead on that very night, on 15th of July, when the mosques started, all of them together, praying Salah. Salah is a special form of prayer that that the mosques do when there is a dead person, and it is extremely creepy. I mean, like, it gives you the sense of death. And during the entire night, non-stop, every mosque on loud voice played Salah. And it's, still gives me goosebumps.
As though they were announcing the end of the secular republic.
Well, it wasn't, they weren't openly saying that, but it was like, it was so obvious that we were going to wake up to another country. And fighter jets, Salah, maybe I am quite right when I say, women are the canaries in a mine when it comes to fascism, because you actually feel something is happening. Okay, many people did at the time anyway, but it was so real. I mean, like, yeah, it's done, and as a product of secular Turkish Republic, I have no chance surviving in this country, neither financially nor emotionally, in whatever way you can think of.
So that's important when you talk about the.
Wow.
The ghost of secular Turkey appears. That's important when you talk about women as the canary in the coal mine, as it were, because this is one of the first things that you identify in the playbook of the rise of what I called in a podcast, the rise of the Iron Men, is they target women. Explain that to us.
Lately, I wrote a sentence saying that if an institution cannot accommodate women's laughter, then there is the fascism there in embryonic form. I think this is a universal fact. It's not about Turkey or Iran at this point. I think fascism is, at the very bottom of it, is the fear of the female. I'm not talking about women. I'm talking about everything that is female. Everything that is not extremely regulated. Everything that is not male. You can say nature is female. You can say that there is a female side in men as well, which fascism hates, again. So I think fascism is the hatred of female. And that is something that shows itself in, almost in quite insignificant ways in the beginning. And the funny part of this story is that when women are under attack, or female is under attack, let's say gays or transsexuals and so on, anything that has female in it, somehow the male status quo, turns a head. Oh my God, kind of don't really take it seriously. Somehow they think that there will be a deal between the status quo and fascism, or the fascist inclinations. And you know what? We can give few women as the sacrifice. This is not coincidence that, it's not a coincidence that in every country there is rising right-wing populism or fascism. It's first the female journalists that are like sacked. It was 3 of us from mainstream media. It was so funny because we were all like, you know, looking nice. You know? They put our pictures on a newspaper saying that the first 3. Yeah, it looked like, you know, okay, they killed 3 witches of Shakespeare, and now the king reigned properly. So in every country, it's the same thing. I mean, like, don't you think it is completely insane that the world is coming to an end, as in like tomorrow, and everybody's talking about the wombs of women? Like obsession with this abortion thing, you know. There is something about fear of female, and if it is there, it you know, 100% will lead to some sort of fascism. So this happened in Turkey, and I saw it happening in other countries as well.
So it's interesting that you should talk about institutions which don't tolerate female laughter are an indication of something deeply wrong, because you also have an interesting, in terms of your 7 steps on the way to fascism, an interesting reflection on the role of humor. Explain that to us about why funny is not necessarily funny.
Yeah, Britain spent quite a lot of time on the 6th step of 7 steps from democracy to dictatorship. It's laughter. Yeah, humor is so nice. I mean, like, and whenever there's these guys in power, when as soon as they come to power, actually, we start laughing. Like, I cannot, you know, there was this endless humor about Boris Johnson, even more so for Trump. And that laughter, I think, is kind of something that we do to feel a little bit secure. Well, as long as we can laugh about it, it's okay, kind of. Good, nice. And laughter can also be the source of resistance as well, and opposition. But there is an illusion there that we have to be aware, and we have to watch out when we are laughing, how we are laughing, to whom we are laughing. Does it really work? Does it have a consequence? Or is it an inconsequential, let's feel safe laughter? Also, there's another thing about laughter and humor and sarcasm in particular. When it doesn't work, when the opposition is completely devastated, that laughter, that sarcasm, that humor turns on in itself. And you see people from the opposition, from the progressive circles, making fun of each other, being sarcastic to each other, and using that, you know, how do you say this, you know, the arrows of humor against each other. So laughter is a slippery ground, humor is a slippery ground, and it might really be a step towards dictatorship. Because would Trump care? You know, or would Boris Johnson care? I'm like, if he cared, he didn't have the hair. So they don't care about our laughter. We care about, we think it's important, but actually it's absolutely inconsequential in terms of politics.
So when I made this podcast, which came out just after your book called The Rise of the Iron Men, I included Boris Johnson in it. And in the United Kingdom, I got a lot of criticism for including Boris Johnson, because, you know, he's exactly as you said, he's fluffy, he's funny, you know, he's a clown, he's surely not a threat. But and Erdogan, well, in fact, I interviewed you extensively for the Erdogan program. My criterion on that was that these were leaders, Bolsonaro, Trump, Duterte, and so on, Orban, Modi, who are elected into power through largely free and fair elections. And then the minute they get into power, they start dismantling and undermining the very institutions which enabled their rise in the first place. And this, it seems to me, is the critical point of your of your book, that institutional dismantling. When did you first start identifying that that was going on?
In Turkey or abroad?
First in Turkey and then abroad.
In Turkey, there were these political cases against secular, strictly secular circles, intellectuals, politicians, academics, and so on. And, the progressives, which I belong to, let's say, or socialists or leftist people, they didn't really care about it. I'm a lawyer by education, by the way. I never practiced the job, but I'm a lawyer. And I was asking them, what happened to the rule of law? Huh? And then I remember a leftist, older generation, public intellectual, let's say, told me, let's get rid of these army supporters, militarists, and strictly secular people, and then we'll take them down, meaning Erdogan. And I asked him, with whom are you planning to do this? And through what? Anyway, so that was a funny story that I keep remembering these days. But rule of law and institutions, these are invisible things that are there because of consensuses, not because of certain laws or constitutions. And when those consensuses are damaged, you cannot bring them back, one. And second, it is only natural for a middle-class European person to think that our institutions are protecting themselves. Well, bad news, they're not. They're people. And those people are vulnerable, especially when a guy comes to power who doesn't give a fuck about the consensuses. And this is what happened in the United States. And even though Trump is not in power, his appointees in Supreme Court are, and that's why today American women have to deal with abortion problem.
Yep.
And Boris Johnson did the same thing.
Yep.
And these things are not fancy. It's not like a, Christmas party, going against the rules of the whatever lockdown and in this commission, sub-commission of this institution, this guy is not there anymore, but there's another guy. Who would read about this? How can you make TV news about this? But that is the important thing, and that's how institutions are dismantled.
And you can't, in the case of the United States, which is the easiest, most visible to see because of the packing of the Supreme Court by Trump's supporters, that is a very stark reminder about the institutions.
More importantly, Capitol Hill, when that happened, insurgents begin, I thought, who is there? Who are the security guards? Who put them there? Were they put by... Of course they were. Otherwise, can you do that? No, of course not. But yeah, those are the boring stuff that journalists, good journalists, talk about, write about, whatever, but it's not flashy, let's say.
Now, your first book, to an extent, I saw it as an address to a European and American audience saying, you better watch it.
Yeah.
And let me explain to you how it happens, and here are the steps.
Yeah.
And it was quite a dark book in terms of the fact that you were talking about the construction of fascism 70 years after the defeat of fascism. Then you came out with Together, and you're going to have to remind me of the subtitle, the new one.
Manifesto Against the Heartless World, and that heartless world is a reference to Marx. Anyway.
So what you're doing with Together is you're trying to show ways forward that in this dark world, we as individuals and as communities, we can create a new way of thinking and a new way forward. What inspired you to write something which had a very different message from your previous book? Almost, one might say, possibly even contradictory message for your previous book.
I'll tell you. I wrote How to Lose a Country. I think it's published in 15 languages or so. So I was like a, traveling circus all around the world, from Sydney to Washington, depressing everybody I meet. And, I have curly hair, by the way, and I really look like Cassandra. Like, you're all going to die. It was so funny. Anyway, I depressed every possible audience, big and small. And then every time there was a question at the end, so where is hope? Because I convinced them that fascism is coming towards them, so they're asking, where is hope? And I thought they were serious about that question. I wrote together. So here's the hope. By the way, I don't like the word hope, but that's first chapter in the book. I'm not telling you. I'm not giving any spoiler about that. I thought they were serious. But then, Misha, between you and me, people have an addiction to political apocalypse and apocalyptic narrative. They were all hypnotized when I were telling them, like, you're all going to be run by fascist leaders. In a very strange way, they loved me. But then, I'm giving speeches about Together. The first thing they do, all these, like, hypnotized, they go like, this is so naive. What the fuck? You asked me. Like, what's your problem now? Anyways, no, this is serious, because actually, right now, there's an intellectual industry about this. I don't know if you notice. We are all going to die industry.
Yeah, I think I'm part of it, actually.
Well, I am too, but still. Yeah. But also, there's another industry, hope industry. Everybody's trying to write hopeful books. Okay, why did I write that book? Actually, I was depressed. No, seriously, I was depressed. And I was seeing horrible things. And I thought, and, talking about fascism every day for, 2 years, it just gets in your head. And I thought I have to make a moral and political decision.
And that was it, to write Together.
I made a moral and political decision to believe in humankind. It's not that they convinced me, but I seriously thought, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my mind, and it will become baseless. Everything I write will become meaningless.
I mean, what struck me about Together, I have to say that I don't think you're entirely right about people, or at least in my experience, about people not being interested in hope. Because I find, if I'm giving keynote speeches, that if I don't end on a note of optimism and a note of, but wait a minute, there are things we can do about this, then people get so miserable that it essentially freezes them into inaction. Whereas if you give them a sense of hope, or here are some possibilities, it means they go away having hopefully learnt something, but also feeling like you would feel after reading Together, that actually there are some really positive things here. And you could feel better about yourself and better about the world, and therefore more engaged with the world.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in what you say? Like when you are doing the hopeful bit of the... No, this is a... No. Listen, this is a serious question. I asked the same thing to Yanis Varoufakis. Do you believe in these things? No. What is important is us believing in them. We are talking, we are writing, whatever.
Yep.
So you have to really believe in it. And I made a decision, not seriously, I'm repeating this, not because the world state is convincing me, but I made a decision. That's why the first chapter of that book is faith against hope.
Yep.
Because this is a hopeless time. But not hopeless time, let's not put it that way. This is a very, very dark time. And hope is not a consequential word. What if I tell you today, there's no hope, my friends? What would it change for you tomorrow? I'm like, how would it change you tomorrow? What would you do differently tomorrow? Or what if I say, okay, there is hope, and this is the hope. Will you really do something different tomorrow? Tomorrow isn't like literally tomorrow. So hope is an inconsequential, fragile word. Whereas faith in humankind, by the way, not a religious way, faith, that is an unbeatable weapon of humankind.
So I think this is interesting because together as a book, I mean, how to lose a country is depressing. It's a narrative I understand. It's a narrative I've observed and so on. What I thought about together is that philosophically and emotionally, it was a more interesting book. Not to deny,
thank you very
not
much.
to deny how to lose a country, but you know there is a lot in that book where you stop and think, and this concept of faith in humankind, I thought was very, very helpful, and I'd never thought about hope in that way either. That hope was paradoxically hopeless, in as much that it doesn't change anything, and so there are a whole string. Well, I'm not going to give away all the secrets because I hope you'll go and buy the book now. But in some senses, together was a more profound piece of work from my perspective, because it made me think about things which, as you say, do I believe in it at the end of a speech? I think I do, in as much that until we screw it up totally, humans have the brain power, have the capacity, in theory, to do something about it. And as long as that exists, and it's not hope, that's a knowledge of humankind, your faith really, then we can, then there is still the opportunity to reverse the worst trends in history that we're witnessing. But I want to hand it over to the audience here for their questions and answers, because that is what they're here for. Audience, questions, answers?
Hi there, thank you very much for your talk. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the lack of femininity in this more traditional sense when it comes to fascism and how women get stamped out. And while I very much appreciate this idea, there seems to be a growing presence of women within populist right-wing movements, at least in Europe. We see the recent elections in Italy. We know the quite famous example of Marine Le Pen. The president of Hungary is a woman elected by the parliament, which is overwhelmingly Fidesz. And generally, even in recent history, conservative movements seem to have been better at platforming women, whether we think of Angela Merkel, Margaret Thatcher, or even Theresa May.
Angela Merkel would be really depressed to be mentioned in this group.
Well, that's not my point, but you see what I mean. She was still the leader of a center-right party, not a center-left party. So I would like to hear your opinion on this phenomenon.
I didn't use those words, by the way. I can use those words. I know those words, but instead of femininity, I said female, and I said I'm not talking about women. I'm talking about female. So what is female for me does not cover Meloni, for instance, or Thatcher, especially not Thatcher. But, you know, has been going on, this discussion about can women be fascists. I don't know, it's time-old thing, you know, as old as fascism, and there are many books and many ideas about it. But what is interesting to me about Meloni, for instance, is that if you don't, if you're an alien and you just arrived on the planet yesterday, you know about the ideologies in general, you turn on the TV, BBC or whatever, Rai and Meloni's talking, you would think that, wow, what a revolutionary woman, anti-colonialist, and like, I think she's going to defend redistribution of wealth very soon and so on. It's so interesting. I mean, like, did you try listening? By the way, she's very charismatic. And she's using the discourse of the left. This is so interesting. And I thought, when listening to her, I remember the Capitol Hill insurgents. And do you remember the guy with the funny fur hat? The first 60% of his speech, I could sign for that. He was talking about big, big capital, this and this, So it is only tragic that all this anger of people, anger coming from their broken dignity, cannot be politicized by progressives and the left, yet they are politicized by fascism. It is ironic that we are doing this talk in Vienna. Vienna is a crazy, crazy place, as you know. I mean, like, this city is the home of the crazy ideas that fucked up 20th century, actually. And we are almost replaying that moment with Technicolor scenes. It's not black and white anymore. Radical ideas, off-the-center ideas, and so on. So it will be a real political war very soon. And center, that common sense British invention, will not hold.
So here's the thing, as a consequence of that, how is it that all of us are sitting here watching what's happened in Hungary, watching what's already happened in Turkey, Poland, Trump, Brexit we've experienced, and we sit here and we say, oh, this is terrible, this is fascism on its way, blah, blah, blah. And we're completely incapable of doing anything about it. And that encompasses much of academia, much of public intellectual thought, much of the discourse of the popular arts, whether it's television, drama, film, theatre, or whatever. And we appear, however, to be politically utterly impotent.
Excuse me, Misha, but we are allowed to call it fascism since, let me see, 5 days. Because it was only 5 days ago, New York Times, on its first page, proclaimed that this is fascism through Italian elections. Otherwise, the mainstream media, I remember being, metaphorically beaten up by moderators on stage, on screen, just because I used the word fascism. And it didn't only happen in Germany, by the way, but in Britain, in the United States. How can you say that word? So finally, it is becoming mainstream very recently. It is becoming kosher to use the word. Otherwise, it was right-wing populism. That's it. It was just a passing by fancy. Now it's fascism. And I see the panic, by the way. I come from Athens. There was Athens Democracy Forum. And I saw the panic. And there is panic in Europe right now. I don't know how many democracy panels, conferences, seminars I'm invited to right now. I wish they woke up sooner. Unfortunately, it's too late for certain things. But at least now we know that we are allowed to call it fascism. Now we're, calling the spade a spade. So it will be clearer from now. However, what is not still clear, and I hope they don't lose that much of time this time around, they don't understand, the mainstream intellectuals, mainstream academia, mainstream politicians, centrist politicians, most importantly, they don't understand they should be more afraid of fascists than they are of socialists. This is very important. Why do we have Le Pen Maybe Macron was a little bit closer to Mélenchon. We wouldn't have had Le Pen so strong. Or why did we have Meloni? Maybe, you know, Italian socialists could be a little bit more embraced by Italian centrist politics. I'm like, Biden, the only reason Biden won is Bernie Sanders, if you ask me. Because he created the air, he created the wave. Otherwise, he couldn't have won. So, you know, Biden, American politics, is somehow more clever than European politics. I think the Cold War fears are still present. And if we're going to have fascism, like fully formed fascism in Europe, it will be thanks to the fears of the Cold War. Communism, fear of communism.
We've got a question in the front row. Have we got a microphone? Or is...
Sorry, I'm kind of like this.
Doesn't matter. My name is Mirjana Tomic. I have a question. It seems to me that everything I believed in is falling apart, like democracy, human rights, women's rights. And it seems that it's falling apart without any major resistance. And I'm thinking of the part of the world where democracy has been around for some time. Why is it, or has it been so easy to dismantle democracy? And the institutions especially.
Well, there was this intellectual fashion, or especially in mainstream media, op-eds were written around, oh, how did we end up with Boris Johnson? How did we end up with Trump? Oh. And I'm like, it took them years to understand that it's thanks to Reagan, thanks to Thatcher, we have these guys, all these infantilization of masses, all those years of suppressing the union movements, socialists, well, in my part of the world, literally killing them, torturing them. So generation of progressives were either killed, tortured, or exiled from social life, political life, everything. Who do you think, you know, protecting these institutions? Educated, progressive people. Otherwise, democracy is a luxury for humankind. One. And second, let me mention with respect and solidarity the Iranian women today. And I send my, you know, my heart to them. That is how you protect democracy. That is how you actually resist tyranny. Unfortunately, and this is from How to Lose a Country, democracy smells onion. In Acropole, when you're climbing to Acropole, there are these frescoes. Is it called frescoes? When you carve the... Anyway, descriptions of men, Athenians, walking to Acropole to build democracy. And they all have this loaf of bread and an onion in their hands. So they walked all the way to the top of the hill to build the democracy. So not to starve, they were eating onions. So this is how you protect things. I remember from Turkey a tweet on a referendum night. It was 2012, I think. The guy was saying, I was a communist situationist, blah, blah, blah. You know, he says all these intellectual words, and then he says, and now I ended up monitoring the ballot boxes. This is how you defend democracy. Unfortunately, it's on the ground. It's blood, sweat, and tears, and that's it. So we are no more allowed to do our intellectual, artistic thinking as we were during 1980s, 90s, whatever. And the capital that is spared for us, for people like us, for these kind of things, is no more there as well. You know, that's another important thing.
The Iranian case is really fascinating at the moment. I mean, I can't think of any other society where you've had such an upsurge, and of course, driven by women, of what looks like positive resistance. Do you, when you look at Iran, do you have faith in the Iranian people?
Faith. Absolute faith. I was thinking the other day, I mean, like, I was there during Tahrir in Cairo. I was there in Tunis when El Thawra was happening. I was in Gezi in Turkey when the uprising was happening. And I watched Greece and Spain closely. And then many people thought that nothing came out of them. Well, true. I mean, like, they didn't bring about new political models or whatever, like better democracies, maybe. Well, Spain a little bit, maybe. But I always thought that those protests movement, those uprisings, changed the fabric of politics, the very fiber of politics for all of us. And then I remembered something else. I lived in Tunisia to write Women Who Blow on Nuts, my novel. And there was a very old woman. She showed me how to produce jasmines. And that was called Jasmine Revolution, by the way. They hate it, the Tunisians, but it was called. Anyway, you don't put, you don't break a branch and put it somewhere else. You take one of the branches, and then you kind of put it underneath the soil, and wherever you want it out, you stick it out. And I thought, this is what's happening. 10 years ago, something happened in the Arab world, in that part, in that region. And now, for 10 years, it was going underneath the soil, and then it came out from Iran. You never know where it will come out from. Or maybe it came out from Chile, which we have to follow very carefully, I think. And then maybe it just, crossed the ocean and came out from Iran. This is how change happens. It doesn't just destroy everything, as it transforms. And then I think there is a transformation, and it's not a coincidence, because women have not been this strong since 3,000 years. Economic power, education, political experience. And for the first time, they are not afraid of being punished with loneliness. That's important. And they are not embarrassed. So it will go on. I think it will go on.
Well, I think that optimistic note is, of course, where we have to stop.
This is realistic, not optimistic, if you ask me.
Well, it's realistic optimism, or optimistic realism. Ece, thank you so much. Ece has agreed, I believe, to sign books.
Sure.
So that's an even more optimistic note. So may I encourage you all to stream out to the bookshop at the front there and buy Ece's 2 books, which I think we've got on sale in both German and English. And in the meanwhile, give her a rousing round of applause.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thank you.